So Shiv, I've had like this sort of epiphany, well, I guess thought experiment these last few weeks. And I was thinking like, what is the number one thing that holds us back from achieving goals and dreams and anything? Yeah. What do you think is like the number one thing? Oh, for you, what is this number one thing that holds you back from achieving your goals?
I think it's my mind. Mind and then insecurities is a big one because the mind is a complicated matter, right? Your mind holds past experiences, your mind holds thoughts about future experiences. Your mind is focused on so many different things. And so it's hard to think straight at times. And so when you've got so much going on, there's different reference points in your life that make you think that, you go back to and you failed. Let's say, for example, or you didn't do well, or you didn't do what you said you were going to do. That compounds in your mind over time. And then that makes you believe that you're not going to be able to do it. And so from experience, being able to speak positively to yourself and changing those little things in your mind helps you get to the next level or helps you achieve what you want to do. But I think from experience, it's your mind, and then insecurities as well. Like insecurities is sort of a byproduct of your failures. And so, but you shouldn't see failures as a bad thing. You should see failures as an opportunity to learn and evolve and beat those insecurities. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think it's mainly a mindset thing, to be honest, because like the way I think of the mind is like a computer. Like we have programmed instructions, right? Majority of these instructions that we have, like these scripts, are from childhood, like 0 to 5. Apparently, like the ratio of positive to negative words, like it sort of dictates what your outlook on yourself and your world will be. And there's apparently like ratio of positive to negative words. So if you have more negative words, then obviously you're going to go more likely down the route of becoming a significantly insecure person. And that's going to reflect over to your work life, to your relationships and everything else. Whenever there's opportunities presented to you, you will basically dismiss them or not even see them. And I think that's what it is. Like, and the thing is, like, when you think about identity, like you haven't chosen your name. That was handed to you. You didn't choose your race. You didn't choose so many other factors. These were sort of programmed in a sense or determined. So it's like, I guess from 0 to 18, from childhood and all, from literally when you were born to when you're an adult, like you have all these instructions programmed in your mind. And some of them may be really good, right? But there might be some that are like, I would consider as viruses, right? They're like your negative, bad scripts that limit your potential. And I think that's what's important. Like when you have that now, when you're at an age where now you have that intelligence now reflect and think, it's like identifying what are the scripts that are actually limiting my potential and myself and making me view everything in a very negative light. When you identify those, I feel like that's when you can start to now be able to unlearn those scripts or uninstall them and then reinstall new ones. And so that's that analogy of the mind being like a computer that makes you think about very carefully about your thoughts and like what are your, also the language that you use as well. And that reflects a lot from past experiences for sure. And I completely agree with that. And I think that is the number one thing that holds us back pretty much. And when you think about the time, right, where you say, you can't do something. Think about when you're like a newborn, right, a toddler who's learning how to walk. If you were an adult and you never knew how to walk and you're trying to learn how to walk, you would have probably given up in the first three tries because you would have fell. And because you know that it's bad, the language of negative terms and bad, and you feel pain, you resist against pursuing after it. But when you look back when you were a toddler, you didn't know anything about language. You didn't know what was good or bad, right? You only learned through experience, but that sort of allowed you to be able to learn how to speak. That allowed you to be able to learn how to basically walk, how to eat through failure. So it's always been a process where you've actually always gone through failure to learn. Like when you look at a toddler learning how to walk, it took them hundreds of like trips, falls, and then trials to then get to the point where they can actually walk. So it's almost funny how, when we get confronted with failure as an adult, we give up immediately. Whereas we've set so many examples in the past where we've gone beyond that and achieved our goals.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because as we grow older, as a you don't remember a lot of things as a toddler of what you've done, and so that reference points never exist in your mind, right? So the new reference points that exist in your mind are like new memories that you have going through primary school onto high school, and so, and this is my interpretation of it is those new experiences start to actually make who you are as well. Because although I think a toddler it's a malleable being, right? How you speak to it, how you treat it, how you raise it, it'll dictate how they view the world as they age. But beyond that, even if you've done the right things to raise that child well, that person still has so much more to learn and fail from. And so even though they might not have insecurities growing up, they'll develop insecurities over time, because everything that they've experienced as a toddler, yes, parts of it could remain with you, but parts of it, maybe it's not unlocked in that part of that section. And so these new experiences then take over that. And then you become a completely different, completely different person, but you become different to how you were probably raised.
Yeah, I think with a toddler, I think, to be honest, well, actually beyond that, is I think everyone will actually have insecurities. I think there's no such thing as no one having insecurities. Whoever says that is actually lying.
And it goes back to the point, you'll never have what everyone else has, and everyone else won't have what you have. You're always going to be lacking something in life. You're not ever given everything. And that's sort of the purpose, is to unlock those other things and fulfill those things, or find what works for you or what your values are. But it doesn't mean that you're going to always have everything. Like what person X has, person Y won't have, but vice versa.
And I think that's what makes life beautiful in that sense, because you can always learn and grow from different people.
Yeah.
And I think it makes you also unique as well, those types of things. Because if no one faced any problems or anything, there would be no such thing as growth. Because growth actually is experienced when you have pain and struggle. And if you don't have any of those things, then you have stagnation. Like you realize everything, like with gym, with business, with starting in your career, anything you go through, like you have to go through the pain of rejections when you're starting off, of interviews, the pain of, lifting weights, the pain of the value of despair, right? For a successful business. It's like pain is inevitable. And I like this other thing that I came across yesterday, which was like some guy was saying how his name is Vuzi, like he's a really good articulated speaker. And he's saying like how it's either you choose the emotion or you choose growth. You can't choose both at the same time. And what he meant by that is like, say when you go to the gym, when you experience pain, you can just either be like, I give up, I don't want to do it anymore, and just go with the emotion. Or either you just be like, look, this is actually the moment where I can get the most growth. And you look beyond past the emotion. You don't give up to the emotion. You actually go beyond it. And that's when you actually experience growth. So he was putting in that frame, yeah.
And your mind is very susceptible to emotion. Your mind is driven by emotion. Everything that you do, your actions are driven by emotion. Right. So let's say if you're driving down the road, someone cuts you off, how you react is based on your emotion. Your emotion is anger. Your output is your reaction. So it's interesting. That's actually a really good analogy, because it can't be applied. It can be applied in any scenario. Growth will come from letting go of a situation and being the better person, and knowing that your insecurities don't need to be shown. If you're someone that's an angry person, or you're insecure about yourself and you just let it out on the world, the best way to deal with that is to let go.
And I think That's actually, I really like how you said let go, because I feel like the most painful part is when you actually have to let go of who you were in those situations. When you go through like tragedy and difficult situations, right? It's like the hardest part isn't really the situation. It's actually like, oh wow, like the person I am right now isn't ready for this, or the person I was isn't ready for this situation. That means now I have to accept a new part of myself. And I feel like that is the hardest. Like we think about a heartbreak, any of those situations, your identity was like tied to this individual or like a part of like your lifestyle. And now it's like you have to almost, in a way, let go of that, as you said. And you have to embrace a now new identity or new part of yourself. And I think the question in those difficult times is more of like, who do I need to become to be able to withstand or evolve or grow from this experience or surpass this obstacle that's right in front of me? And I think when you put yourself in that frame, then you think about characteristics, qualities, habits, things like that, and then you start to grow through that. And I think that isn't really, that's a really good question to like ask yourself in those situations, because then it puts you in a more of a growth type of mentality rather than someone who becomes a victim of the situation and behaviors.
Yeah, no, letting go is important. And I like the way you like it makes sense. You know, who you are at 18 to who you are at 21 to who you are at 25. It's a completely different mindset. It's different. It's very different. I mean, I'm experiencing it right now. It's 25, and obviously it's still mid-20s. You still think there's so much more to experience. I'm still kind of young, but you sort of go to a reference point in like when I was 21 and you think, oh, well, I was really young then, but I was a very completely different person then. The way I thought, my ambitions, my goals, my values were very different to what I am now. And, you know, I mean, that's not an extreme case of letting go, but you've got to sort of grow up at a certain point or build new habits, healthier habits that are beneficial for you, or work on values that are important to you in the long term. But then in saying that, who I become from 25 to 30 will be completely different as well. So it's essential, I think, because you've got to let go of, it's bringing those experiences with you, but letting go of the outcome of those experiences. So rather than what I mean by that is bringing the journey with you, but leaving the destination where it is and going to a new destination. And so when you go to that new destination, you're bringing your experiences from that journey and you're taking it on this journey. And so now you know how to deal with different obstacles, but your destination each time won't matter. Your destination at each point will change for the better or sometimes for the worse. You know, you might go through this intense journey and things, when you get to that destination, it might not be what you expected. It might be failure. It might not be the success that you wanted. So how do you deal with that? You let go of that destination, learn from that journey, apply it to the next journey.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's a beautiful perspective of destination and journeys, especially because we can get so tied into destinations, especially.
It's a bit like in relationships, for example. You know, if you go through a breakup, you let go of that person, but you don't let go of what you learned from that and the person you became, and you sort of reflecting on what could have been better, taking on to that next person or that next relationship. That's part of that. You don't take the person with you that you've had to let go of. You take what you've learned and those parts of that. Even with a new job, for example, you know, when people start a new job, what do? You don't carry your new job with you. You carry your experiences, your skills, your values with you to the next part. Or when you have a second child, you know, I mean, I don't have children, so this might be a really bad analogy, but your first child, you know, I mean, I'm not confident to say this, but maybe how you raise your first child compared to your second and third will be a bit different because you've learned a lot of things along the way. Yeah,
that's why they said like the third or fourth child has it good, because the parents learn the mistakes from the first and the second.
And the first and second kids raise them pretty much. The older siblings end up raising the kids. So
yeah, it's interesting. That's why they say you should have 4 children, but each of their own. Each of their own. But
with the cost of living these days.
I don't know, but I'm just saying like the fourth child would have it the best because they got like all the benefits. But
100%.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of how you've framed it. And I wanted to also go back to the question, because I think you asked about like, why do you think it is the case that we have, I think it was like negative Because we're talking about toddlers, and you said about what's the question is like why do you think it's the case that we give up so easily? Was it? Or?
I think it's yeah. I mean, yeah. I think that's a really good question. That's probably the best way to phrase that question because, you've shown by example that as a toddler you've had to go through thousands of failures to get to where you are. Right? Even being able to press a button, or pick the book up. Like, that's not something that you've learned as an adult. That's something as a child you've had to be curious to learn to think. How do I, and from experience, like seeing younger kids go through little obstacles or having to do a task, between like from a 3 or 5 year old perspective, it's quite interesting when you observe them, how they go on about it, because it's a very curious type of learning. It's not, for us, it's standard. Put the triangle in the triangle hole. Easy, right? But the way they think about it is, they'll pick up a different one, they'll try to fit it in, they'll go, okay, maybe this one doesn't work. And it's a very, like I said, it's a curious type of approach to their learning, which is really fascinating when you think about it, because that's where you see probably the most growth as well.
And the fastest growth, to be honest.
Exactly. It's those quick failures, I mean, it's, again, sometimes you can't compare what toddlers do to how adults learn, but it shows a reference point that the best thinkers, the best philosophers we've had, it was a lot of curious thinking. It was about failing quick, learning from it, moving to the next thing.
It's actually, yeah, and it's very true pretty much, because I think and when you think about like the example of like an adult versus a child learning to ride a bike, they've never ridden a bike before. They did an experiment on this. The child learned how to ride a bike faster. The adult couldn't even learn how to ride a bike. And sometimes what I think I think some people argue it's neuroplasticity. Yeah, I probably agree that is. But I also think it's limiting beliefs and I think part of that is also language and how you interpret language. Because I think, say for example, as an adult, you have so much knowledge. You're so logical. You rationalize everything. And then, risks. You know what risks are. But a child doesn't exactly know risks until they physically experience it. Unless I think it really takes physical experience to learn, to be honest. And so when an adult rides a bike, right, they fail a few times, they stack it, they fall over, they immediately give up because they are scared of injury. Whereas a child is like, yeah, they don't give up so easily. They see, yeah, they probably experience a bit of pain, but they like the idea of like being able to ride a bike and just enjoy riding it. And they don't think about the pain as much, as opposed to an adult who tries to rationalize and logically think about it and says, oh, like, this risk of me getting into an accident, there's too much for me to fail for this point. Whereas a child doesn't have that crazy analysis paralysis going in their mind. It's very much more simple. So I think that's what it is. And I think that's what it ultimately is. It's just in the way you interpret it. An adult, they might have a lot of anxiety. How would people perceive me if I ride a bike and fail? Whereas a child doesn't care. Maybe most of them wouldn't care. So it's like, I think that's what it is, right? It's limiting beliefs as well. And it's how we interpret language, how we interpret ourselves. Because as a toddler, right, they don't know what good or bad really is until you tell them. You tell them this is bad, but they don't know until they get physical feedback. When they put the triangle inside of a circle piece, they realize, oh, it's not fitting in. And then someone tells them, you're doing it wrong. Then they start to learn, oh, this is what wrong means. So then I think that's what it is. Like they don't, and because it's so fresh and new, like they don't have perspectives as much. It's almost like limitless potential to learn because they have nothing that's holding them back. There's no sense of negative thoughts in their mind that is trying to rationalize to them of why you shouldn't pursue it. So I think that's what it really is. It's not just language, but it's the interpretation of language. And that's what, if someone tells you, say for example, a short guy, right, who's going to do modeling, and someone says to him, oh, you shouldn't do modeling because, you're short. You're not going to be good against someone who's like 6 foot. Now that guy thinks I can't do it. He realized he interpreted the shouldn't, right, as I can't. And there's a big difference between like shouldn't and can't, because shouldn't doesn't necessarily mean you can't do it. It just means maybe it's just going to be harder for you. That's it. You just have to be at your best performance in every single aspect to really compete against these other people. But he interpreted that shouldn't as can't. And that's because of all these other people that have told him this type of narrative. And it's the narrative or the perspective he has of himself, that he's short, that he can't date someone who's like a good looking girl, I don't know, or his dreams, girls of his dreams, or he can't be successful, or he can't do modeling, he can't pursue any good career. And this is like self-imposed, limiting beliefs. And it's probably because of what he absorbs from social media, probably absorbs from what other people say of him. And that's the narrative that he has of himself. And that's how he's interpreted his self-image. And no matter amount of surgery he does, no matter bodybuilding he does, anything he does is not going to solve that issue. Not even money can solve that. Because it's as I said, it's a script in your mind that you've programmed for so many years that you have to now learn you have to identify and uninstall that. Because just because someone says you shouldn't do it doesn't mean you can't do it. And I think, understanding that difference is very important.
That's really well said. I think we're just so quick to program ourselves as well. And I think if you think about it, like, we tend to write our own scripts and code our own selves into believing something that we think this programming is going to help us. Or we don't think about how we program ourselves. We just tend to just do it, and we do it subconsciously. Like the whole thing about that you said about, the short guy not believing in himself or being driven by everyone else's perspective. That whole programming, it's very common now because that's what social media is doing, right? It's a form of, I'm not going to say propaganda because it's not the right way to describe it, but it is a form of social programming. If I think you've said this example before, like if you see 10 girls on OnlyFans, for example, on TikTok, right? And if your feed is all OnlyFans girls, you have a bigger problem. But in saying that, just in general though, if all your feed is just Instagram models and OnlyFans, your whole perception of women is that they're just like, all girls must be doing OnlyFans, all girls must be doing this. Same way for a guy who's like short. All they're going to see on social media is short guys can't do this, short guys can't do that. But there's so many reference points in the present and the past, and there will be in the future, that short guys are just are successful as taller guys. Like, you've got to get out of that superficial mindset and actually go and speak to people and actually experience it before you start to draw conclusions. So I think we tend to program ourselves a lot, but we allow the program to dictate how we think, but we don't think about building new programs a lot and think of different reference points. Like, how can I change that coding in my mind, for example, or change that script to make it think to, like, will it support what I believe in, or will it change what I believe in? Because in my experience, like from what I've just in general experience, like when you actually start to program yourself and then you actually go and seek the truth, or you try to find your own version of truth or your own programming in this sense, you become a completely different person. You actually start to think very differently, because if you're wrong about one thing, what else could you be wrong about? Does that make, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's is why we're not getting into conspiracies in general, but it's sort of like a conspiracy theory. If that conspiracy is right, what else could there be that could be right? And that's why it's important to question things and be curious about things.